So I want to show you pretty much same principles, but now we're looking at something a little more complex to begin with. Now we're not looking at the outer silhouette of the horse. We're looking at the bone structure. So let me walk you through the steps so you can visualize with me. I'm going to draw this. Where would I start? Simplest. I would try to get these two simplest shapes and their sizes in position. So I'm kind of doing the same thing of north, south, east, west, kind of getting a proportion of how it's going to fit on my paper. But I'm skipping that step. Once you know it, you don't have to do it anymore. You could actually just have it into your subconscious and you're adding it as you go. So from there, let me just move this a second over here. There we go. From there, we're going to look at the connection between these shapes and the relationship between the major joints. So think shoulders, elbows, knees, wrists. In our case, we're going to look for those shoulders, elbows, knees on the horse. And we're going to see how one is higher, lower than the other, or how far apart they are. For example, I'm looking at the back legs, how the hips back here, one's higher than the other. As we go down right here, let's call that the knees. One's a little bit higher, but they're really close together. And as we go lower to, let's call that the elbow, they're a little bit separate. And one kind of is a little bit higher than the other. So that's what we're going to begin to piece together like a puzzle. So I'm going to grab another pencil here. This is a B. You could also work with charcoal. So I'm saving today most of it. It would be fine for all of you to just work with pencil for these first steps. We're going to save the charcoal for later, more interesting horse portraits when we actually work with fur and skin and all that. So the amount of detail we're going to put in this drawing it's not major. We're looking for something like this. Eventually, we want to have just nice, good proportions. And that's where we're headed. So we're going to start with number one. So from here, I want you guys to visualize this. And again, getting a sense of how big this needs to be in relationship to the rest. I'm just going to see it. I see it kind of as kind of like a lizard egg shape, about that big. And I want to make sure that this shape, if it's too big, it's going to make my drawing way too big. So I want to make sure it's not too big, too small, but just about the right amount. How can I do that? There's one easy way where you take your pencil and you pretty much do this. So you use the tip of your pencil and your thumb, and with a straight, it really is important that your arm is straight and at the same distance when you do this. You place the pencil tip at one edge and your thumb at the other. And it gives me this measurement. Now, when I take that and I do it 1, 2, 3, it's about 3 of those for the length of it. Let me explain that again. So when I take that measurement, let me go back here. Here we go. So when I measured this right there with my eye, where I put this at the tip, I measured it I measured it from here to here. So the longest part. So my eye, one eye closed, straight arm outward like this. I put the tip of the pencil at the top of this shape and my finger at the bottom of it. And then, having that measurement, I took it from here, 1, putting the tip here, 2, putting the tip here, 3. It took me right about there. So in my measurement, this would fit with a size like this. I know that if this were bigger, that means everything else has to get bigger. So that would push me a little too far to the edges. But the same thing applies where you look at north, east, and you get a sense of how big the outer part is and the lower part is. And you can really readjust those always. So the next thing is once I have this smaller shape, I want to see how high, low is in relationship to the next one. And also a sense of distance. And the distance that I see here is, I'm going to visualize a line that goes straight across the bottom of this shape. And I see that it kind of crosses just the top of that one. So then the next thing is how far. So if I were to draw a straight line this way, meaning at the furthest point right of this shape, and one at the furthest point left of this, what's the space between that? That's the easiest way. And from there, I have 2 points where then I could just get a sense of that shape. So I get a sense, and it also looks kind of like an egg. And using that earlier method that I said about using this to measure it against your reference, you could use the same to measure it against this shape, just to get a really precise sense of, are these two in proportion? But already I could tell, and I'm pretty happy with this, how these are lining up, just according to that. So that is step 1. And if you have this pretty close, you're actually well on your way. And you'll see why. From there, we just connect them. So it doesn't really matter the first shape. And again, remember, I want to make nice, somewhat light lines as I develop my stages. So can anyone see the letter S in this here? So it's a really fine, soft letter S. And what do I mean by that? From here on out, when we work with horses and portraits and all kinds of things in nature, what we're looking at when we look at curves, we look at letter S or letter C. And the letter C could be, I'm going to do a sample down here. Could be like this, or it could be like this. And they both count as letter C's. And it's not a letter C anymore when it gets just too straight. So the letter S could go from here to here to here until it's not a letter S anymore. And all these subtle curves, it's way easier if you think about them as S or C shapes. So when we look at this neck, just getting rid of this here really quick. When you look at this here, what do you see? S or C shapes. So I see a very subtle, very delicate letter S, and also matching here at the top, another sort of, and it could be inverted letter S, but there they are. So they connect that. Once I reach this point here, I want to get a sense of where this ends. I don't want to put it too high or too low. You want to make sure it matches right here. Say, if it were a clock, this would be about 10 o'clock. You don't want to put it at 12 o'clock or 9 o'clock. It's right about there, and it feels right. So same here. I'm going to go just about what would be, again, this is an egg clock, but I want to look at it somewhat more towards the front, and it would be between 6 and 7 o'clock, if that's making sense. And here I'm going to start just adding those major joints, just like you see them here, with just a little line, making sure I get a little bit of a sense of how long those lines are. And how they separate a little space between them from each other. And that's pretty much it right there. That's all the detail I want. So we're pretty much doing an armature of what we're trying to build step by step. From here, I want to make sure I want to get a quick measurement here. There we are. So this, yep, it's a little bit longer. And that, I was having a feeling this was too short compared to this. But no, it actually matches. So the width of this, it's almost exactly the length of this. This is just a little bit longer, but not by much. Now, from here, we're going to look at all the other connecting parts. So I want to make sure I get that nice relationship here at the top. And how am I going to connect this? I'm looking for that big first hip bone. What's the distance and how it relates to the other? Notice that this is lower and further out to the right. Same thing here. We begin to look for the angle. And now, as I look for the angle of these first bones here, I also want you to have a sense of the distance between these next joints and this over here. Okay? So again, most important thing here is the angle and the distance between them. Next thing again, we have another piece of the puzzle driving backwards. Notice that it's not vertical. Notice that it's probably about 20 degrees down this direction. And another clue. If I were to draw straight lines from these, do they line up? I could actually do that with my pencil. And these happen to be higher, just a little bit, than these. So having a straight, and you can actually place your pencil. And notice that right there, this was a little bit higher. And I did that just by placing my pencil, closing one eye, right in front of my reference image. So there you go. And also the distance between these two. Notice that this one that I'm about to draw here is also a little bit higher than this one, but just by a fraction. And the space between it also should match this angle. And there we go. So from here, it's just really easy peasy. One more angle. But as we get more and more complex, you don't want to get careless. You want to stay the same. Focus on attention on focus to some of these smaller parts. And just to finish up, just adding a little line right there. So right now, this could be a dog, cat. As I see it, good. It's a good armature. Our job next is going to be to piece it together, just like we did with the previous one. So we're going to begin to look for more complex. And I know that this is a big jump from here to here. So don't get too caught up on some of the details. Begin to always look for that simplest shape. Now we know how to do a simplified skull shape here. So we know that there's curvatures. I'm going to just begin to get a little more, a couple of smaller lines. My gosh, I feel so confident now that we did that earlier one, that some of these lines are they're resolving themselves pretty much. Having a sense of where everything goes. But also continue taking measurements the way we should. So I'm taking one line at a time and noticing that there's matching relationships between them, but zero detail. I begin to look for those SC shapes as I go right here into the jaw and know that that lines up right here. Pretty much with the knowledge we have from earlier. No more detail than that for now. And I want to begin to just look at the relationship between these parts and just add a few lines that will then allow me to put more detail to them. And that's it. Some of these smaller shapes here that become bones, I just want to get the absolute basic, simplest shape, whether it's rounder, flatter, or curver, have more curve in it. The emphasis here is to begin to start piecing it together without really adding all of the detail that we assume we see. We don't see it yet. These are just smaller and smaller joining of these parts. And actually, I'm looking a little for the thickness of some of these elements that will come into play later. So I'm looking at some of these lines the distance between them, the thickness of them, and just how they end or match at some of the joints here. Sometimes it's just one line, sometimes it's two. And I'm going to do this all the way across without getting too bogged down here in this area in the middle, where it also just kind of curves up a little more, I feel, right into there. And this actually flattens out as it gives me vertebra here. And again, I'm just hinting at it. I'm not even looking at the amount of detail. I'm just hinting at it to give me a clue for later. And some of these curves, you could just add them in for now, but don't, it could be distracting later on. So I'm getting a sense of this. Again, the thickness of some of these bones. C shape, some of these curves and how they come together. And all you're looking for is like triangles, squares, circles. Making sure you're getting the feel for the thickness between one and another. Making sure you see that here, for example, it's thicker at the top, it gets thinner through the middle, and then it thickens out a little bit at the other end. So all these variations of shape, very crucial. And just again, simplified lines that you can then come back and develop. Remember, you're not finishing your drawing here. You're just adding one little extra clue, one little extra piece, kind of putting your place, a little line in place where you know you'll come back and finish with the actual piece that goes in that part of the puzzle. And something interesting I was mentioning before, if we look at bone structure, you'll realize that, this is the shoulder, this is the elbow, and it's almost like it could make sense. And it will make way more sense when you're actually drawing a horse to have this kind of knowledge so you can apply it when time comes. I'm actually counting some of these, but look at me. It's just I'm doing the letter U over and over, not even just dotting it in pretty much. Without much emphasis on detail. Perfect. So, if you're pretty close following along, I'm going to give you guys a couple more seconds if you're following some of these lines so you can, and I'll develop some in here as well. It's not like I was trying to work too fast. You want to be patient. You want to develop your own pace. And that is actually one of the most important things when drawing. You want to make sure you develop your own pace and you can pay attention to it. Sometimes we rush. Sometimes we're going too slow or we're not fully focused. That, getting a sense of how you develop your own pace and what is that nice, sweet spot of pace that you can develop, which one serves you best, that's going to be crucial for you to develop drawings that you're going to be happy with. Okay. And I just want to take you back to this one here. Yes. Okay, so here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to, let me see if this will work. I'm going to make this just a tiny bit smaller, and I'm going to make this one and put it down here. How's that? Does that work? Perfect. Yeah, for those of you who are still working on the red line, kind of stage 3, there's the image. And at the top, now you'll be able to look at, oh, okay, a little bit of difference. You'll be able to begin to, some of these areas that I could literally just finish it by adding a little graphite and blending the one in the back, making it a little darker. Look at that. Immediately you have a sense of, well, that's it. That's done. And that's the sense I want you to have of that looks like bone. And it looks like bone that is nicely shaded. And sometimes with just that much amount of line, you can describe and use it as completed detail. And that's the one thing. How far do we push our drawings, and how much information is enough or too much? And there's a saying, less is more. And I am one of those believers of less. It's hard, but less is more. And it's hard to kind of favor the less part because we always want to keep pushing it. But sometimes just a couple of lines and a little bit of shading without rushing, being very patient. Does such better job than if we actually try to force the detail by drawing it. It's finding little magic tricks, kind of like a magician. I'm going to let you in a little secret. It's not magic. It's tricks. They learn how to do a trick, and then if you see it and you see how it's done, you go, oh, well, that was simple. I could have, if I seen it the first time, you wouldn't have been wowed. But now that you know how it's done, it takes a little practice, and then you become the magician. Then you can do the trick to other people that will go, oh my God, wow, how'd you do that? That's what you're doing here. You're developing techniques to create some of these tricks that build this illusion. The illusion of lines, shapes that represent, in this case, the skeleton of a horse. Adding a little more graphite in certain areas. Blending it in. Notice that just with the amount of lines that I put here in the skull, I'm going to just try to develop it the same way I did on our earlier drawing. And with just a little bit of different types of pressure. And another thing you want to do is make sure you're looking at your reference. You don't want to make up information that's not there. So when you start blending and you blend all over the place, then it becomes a little too monotonous, I would say. But the fact is, it loses the trick. It stops making sense because you're not following the rules of the light. So be careful when you add your blending. Make sure you're not adding carelessly. You want to make sure you do it with a little plan, with precision. Like, okay, I know I need it right here because I squinted and this area looks a lot lighter. I'm going to add a few more lines right in here. Adding a little graphite. Blending. And then again, it's how much graphite do I need to add? You'll get a sense of it. The more and more you practice, the more you'll feel how much graphite is going to do it. Sometimes just a little bit gets too dark for what you were planning. And sometimes just not enough. So it's getting a sense of what type of pencil you're using, how much graphite you're going to add, and how you're going to blend it that comes together. Okay, so let me go in here, and I'm going to add some of these lines. And again, it's mostly, as I work, we realize, oh, it's ribs. I want to kind of follow, making sense of it, and I have clues to it, which is this. And I can always start off with some of these big ones and how they curve and wrap around downwards. You can count them and be precise. I'm guessing there should be 24, 12 on each side. And as they come around this end, that's 6, 7, 8. They get skinnier, thinner as we move back. It's 9, 10, 11, and 12. And I'm going to use that graphite to pretty much create the space in between them. Very carefully making sure I have the right gap. I don't want to blend in on the actual rib. So it might be smarter to just add a few lines of graphite with the pencil first. There's one there, and there's one there, there's one there. And then blend it, because now you know, because it's a little bit of an optical illusion when you have so many lines. You can lose track of what's a rib and what's space. And there we have it. Ooh, this looks cool. So I guess as a final thing that you can do today, we have just a few minutes, we're going to go ahead and try to, just with the thickness of the skin and muscle, I'm going to try to wrap oh my gosh, that's cool, because I just felt like I drew the horse portrait here as I just added a line hinting at the skin. So here is a tricky one, and I love this area of the horse because it's so powerful. So this curve right here, and how much muscle. So the distance, the thickness between the bone and this outer line, you're going to want to do that right here where the ears belong and how big they're going to be. And as it falls back, I want to get a sense of the same thing. Just that thickness. I want to get a little bit of that pec right here, which is a little thicker as well. And the muscle, just that nice S shape, C shape as I work my way down. And it gets thinner and just at the bottom. Actually goes all the way around, so very thin all the way around. And as it grows up, gets a little thicker again, thinner at the bottom. But you notice how in some areas right about here, you see that little bit of extra muscle, that little extra thickness. Now this area here, it goes straight down. So it's good to do that simplified. Give yourself that line first. I feel like I gave it too much right here. And then just follow again. That nice curve. Paying attention to the amount of thickness. Nice tail that goes just below this area here. And this is an interesting part here. Getting a good sense of how it curves, how it wraps, because there's a lot of muscle right here. How it gets thinner again as it works to the bottom. And it's ultra thin. So thin it's almost just like right over the same line. Going back up into a little muscle. Just a little thicker at the joint. And here we go, the belly, which is always that nice, gives it that nice kind of personality trait. Whether the horse is one of those race horses or it likes to eat a lot. And there we go. And I could get give it a little extra. But there we have it. And if you want to, I'm sure you just look for horse skeleton online. You'll have tons and tons of images for you to look at a little bit closer, a little bit further, and maybe develop specific parts. If you have any more questions. And this was not necessarily an anatomy class. I wanted you just to get a full sense of how a horse works. Before we did the actual, what we just finished with, I'm sure from here on out, it will make so much more sense when we look back at these two exercises.